Throughout history and in societies across the world, historians have found the practice of offering final meals to condemned individuals to be quite common. In some ancient cultures, the final meal was offered with the belief that it would prevent the condemned from returning in their afterlife to haunt the executioner. And in others, it was simply offered as a final act of humanity or compassion before the execution was carried out. But regardless of how it started, this process has most certainly lived on around the world and has comprised the final moments of thousands and thousands of individuals throughout history. I've covered about 60 of these meals thus far, and in this video, I'm going to be covering about 20 more. Ladies and gentlemen, words cannot express truly how much your support has meant to me, and from the bottom of my heart, I hope you enjoy part 4 of my Death Row meal rankings. I'm ranking every Death Row final meal request to find out which one's the greatest of all time. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of the presidential assassin Charles Julius Guiteau. In the year 1880, Guiteau considered himself a loyal Republican and was convinced he played a critical role in the election of James A. Garfield as the 20th US president. While in reality, the only substantive contributions he made were a few small speeches to disinterested crowds in New York, Guiteau believed that this should entitle him to be rewarded with a consulship in Europe. But when his applications for these positions were declined, Guiteau felt betrayed and swore to seek revenge. So he waited for President Garfield at the train station and shot him on sight. As a result of this crime, Guiteau was sentenced to death by hanging. For his final meal, Guiteau requested a pound of broiled steak, fried potatoes, 4 slices of toast, and 1 quart of coffee. In my opinion, you can't go wrong with this meal, but for a final spread, it's certainly nothing special. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Richard Michael Cartwright. On August 1st, 1996, Cartwright and 2 of his friends planned to pose as male prostitutes and rob a gay man, a target they felt would be unlikely to report them. So, the group lured in 37-year-old Nick Merida by inviting him to drink at a nearby park. However, when the group arrived, the trio brandished a gun and knife and demanded he give them all his money. But when he refused and tried to flee, one of the men tried to stab him but failed to kill him, so Cartwright shot him in the back. And when both his accomplices testified against him, Cartwright was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Cartwright requested fried chicken, a cheeseburger, french fries, onion rings, bacon and sausage, cheesecake, and cinnamon rolls. In my opinion, when any spread has multiple entrees, sides, and desserts, it's pretty tough to go wrong. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of John David Duty. On December 19, 2001, Duty was serving out a life sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary when prison officials assigned 22-year-old Curtis Wise to be his new cellmate. Then, just 6 days later, in exchange for a few cigarettes, Duty asked Wise to convince the guards that he was being held hostage. However, after Duty tied Wise up, he strangled him to death with a shoelace and then wrote a letter to the boy's mother. And when he was brought to trial, Duty requested the death penalty and vowed to kill again if he wasn't executed. In the end, Duty's wishes were granted and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Duty requested a double cheeseburger with mayo, a foot-long hot dog with cheese, mustard, and onions, a banana shake, and cherry limeade. In my opinion, the spread had a few pretty niche picks, but overall, it didn't stand out. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we're taking a look at the selection of the man who claimed he was too fat to be executed, Brian Dorsey. On December 23, 2006, Dorsey called his cousin Sarah to ask if he could borrow money to pay off his drug debt, but unfortunately, she declined. So, Dorsey waited until later that night when Sarah and her husband were sleeping. Then, he entered their home through their garage, stole a shotgun, and fatally shot them both. But before he left, Brian first violated Sarah's corpse and then proceeded to steal jewelry and their car. In the end, despite arguments that the overweight Brian Dorsey was too obese to humanely execute, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Dorsey requested 2 double bacon cheeseburgers, 2 large orders of fries, 2 orders of chicken strips, and 1 5-topping pizza. In my opinion, every item in this spread was super satisfying, but some contrasting flavors would have been nice. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of the monster preacher Gary Michael Heidnik. Between November of 1986 and March of 1987, Heidnik led what was seemingly a normal existence. He lived in North Philadelphia and served as a bishop at the church he started. However, behind closed doors, this couldn't have been further from the truth. In reality, during this same period, Heidnik secretly kidnapped 6 women and chained them up within a self-dug pit in his basement. And over the 5 months that he held these women captive, he subjected them to extreme sexual and physical abuse and even ended up killing 2 of them in the process. However, after one of his victims eventually escaped and alerted the police, Heidnik was captured and sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Heidnik requested 2 slices of cheese pizza and coffee. In my opinion, these 2 dishes don't really mix well, and even if they did, the spread would still be pretty weak. I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we're taking a look at the selection of John Richard Baltazar. On September 27, 1997, Baltazar heard that his mother's boyfriend, Narciso Cuellar, had beaten her with a baseball bat. So later that evening, he and a friend went to his house to seek revenge. When they arrived, Baltazar knew that Cuellar typically slept on the living room couch. So the pair kicked down the door and opened fire at this target. However, after the hail of gunfire, Cuellar was nowhere to be found, and on the couch instead lied the corpse of 5-year-old Adriana Marines and her injured cousin, who had together been watching the Sleeping Beauty. As a result of this crime, Baltazar was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Baltazar requested Cool Whip and cherries, but unfortunately for him, this request was denied. In my opinion, cherries and Cool Whip is an elite combo, but for a final meal, it's just not enough. I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we're taking a look at the selection of Charles Starkweather. On December 1st, 1957, Starkweather walked into a local gas station and attempted to buy a stuffed animal on credit. However, when the clerk refused, Starkweather kidnapped him, drove him to a remote area, and executed him with a shotgun. And though this was Starkweather's first time killing, it only emboldened him, as over the course of the next 60 days, 18-year-old Starkweather and his 14-year-old girlfriend went on to kill 10 more victims. Among these targets was his girlfriend's parents and half-sister, a family friend, and a pair of teenagers who had offered them a ride. In the end, the pair was captured, and despite his attempts to plead insanity, Starkweather was sentenced to death by electrocution. For his final meal, Starkweather simply requested assorted cold cuts. In my opinion, there's no 2 ways about it. This pick was rubbish, and I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Reginald Lenard Reeves. In September of 1993, 19-year-old Reeves met 14-year-old Jenny Lynn Weeks after she ran away from her foster home. Initially, the pair quickly became acquaintances, and Reeves even offered her a place to stay for the next few weeks while she got back on her feet. However, after just a few days, a witness called the police when she spotted Reeves and a friend carrying a large roll of carpet across the street and into a burned-in abandoned house. And when investigators went to that house, they found Weeks' ravaged and violated corpse stuffed into a hallway closet. In the end, Reeves turned himself in and was ultimately sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Reeves requested 4 pieces of fried chicken and 2 Coca-Colas. In my opinion, while both elements of this spread are very reliable, neither are particularly exciting. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Leo Pilo Echegaray. In the year 1994, Echegaray lived with his lover Rosalie and her 5 young children at their home in Quezon City. Within this household, Leo was the primary breadwinner, and the couple initially had a strong relationship. However, over time, as Rosalie would go out to gamble, Leo would order the eldest daughter, 10-year-old Rodessa, to stay in the home with him and for the younger siblings to leave. And once they were alone, Leo would drag 10-year-old Rodessa into a room and sexually violate her. This secret abuse would go on for up to 5 total assaults until Rodessa informed her grandmother and Leo was captured. As a result of these crimes, Leo was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Leo requested sardines, dried fish, and rice. In my opinion, these types of fish aren't bad, but overall, the spread was pretty bland. I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of the U.S. Army Master Sergeant Louis Jones Jr. On the morning of February 18, 1995, Jones drove onto the Goodfellow Air Force Base in search of his ex-wife, with whom he had a violent altercation earlier that week. However, as he was doing so, he instead came across a different woman with a similar appearance, 19-year-old Tracy McBride. At this moment, Jones hallucinated seeing black smoke and hearing Satan laughing, and thus, he decided to kidnap her at gunpoint. After bringing her to his home, Jones then proceeded to sexually violate her, drove her out into the country, then beat her to death with a tire iron. As a result of this crime, Jones was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Jones requested whole peaches, plums, and nectarines. In my opinion, I'm a fan of all these fruits, but for a final meal, this pick is a bit too one-noted. I'm placing this meal in D tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Robert Lee Massie. At the age of just 17, Massie had his first run-in with the law when he was put in prison for car theft. However, while he was behind bars, he suffered a sexual assault so severe he decided to feign insanity and be submitted to a psychiatric facility. But once he got released, he resumed his life of crime and eventually went on to kill Mildred Weiss in front of her own home. And when he was captured for this crime, Massie was sentenced to death. However, his execution ended up being stayed by then-Governor Ronald Reagan, and he was paroled just 6 years later. But then, within less than a year of being out of jail, Massie committed another murder and was again sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Massie requested French fries, fried oysters, soft drinks, and 2 vanilla milkshakes. In my opinion, fried oysters wouldn't have been my first choice of entree, but the overall spread wasn't bad. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at one half of the Lonely Heart Killer's Martha Beck. In the year 1946, a man named Raymond Fernandez was placed in prison for theft, and his cellmate taught him the ways of voodoo and black magic, skills that Fernandez claimed gave him an irresistible charm over women. So, he decided to meet the 27-year-old Martha Beck when she placed a Lonely Hearts ad in the local newspaper. Before the pair met, Beck was a social outcast due to her appearance, so with this newfound attention, she quickly became infatuated with him and left her children behind. But soon thereafter, Beck found Fernandez in bed with another woman he was engaged to and bashed her skull in with a hammer. From then on out, the pair fled the scene, went on to kill between 2 and 16 more victims, and were captured and sentenced to death by electrocution. For her final meal, Beck requested fried chicken with no wings, French fries, and a salad. In my opinion, this spread is the epitome of average across the board. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Bobby Joe Long. Throughout his childhood, Long had to watch as his mother regularly brought home new men when she came home from work as a cocktail waitress. This, paired with numerous head injuries and him developing breast due to a genetic disorder, all contributed to a tumultuous childhood. Eventually, due to struggles with his identity and relationship, Long began answering newspaper ads to identify targets and sexually violate them. However, in 1984, Long's crimes further escalated when he embarked on an 8-month spree of abducting, sexually violating, and murdering at least 10 different women. But then, when 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh survived his attack and reported it to the police, Long was captured and sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Long requested roast beef, bacon, French fries, and soda. In my opinion, out of all the protein choices you could select, roast beef would not be very high on my list. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of James Lewis Jackson. In the year 1997, Jackson struggled to maintain his marriage, and it quickly became evident that his wife Sharon was intending to divorce him. So one day, when each of Jackson's stepdaughters came home from school, he asked them how they felt about their mother's intentions. The younger of his 2 stepdaughters got home first, so when she expressed ambivalence about the divorce, he strangled her to death. After that, the second of 2 stepdaughters came home too, and the result was the same. And finally, when he went to go pick up Sharon from work, he strangled her as well and then tucked all of their bodies into their beds. As a result of these crimes, Jackson was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Jackson requested fried chicken, fried okra, French fries, salad, hard-boiled eggs with cheese, 2 Cokes, butter pecan ice cream, and 2 honey buns. In my opinion, though some of the dishes could have been better, this spread had a solid selection. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of John Fautenberry. On March 2nd, 1991, Fautenberry booked a one-way flight to Juneau, Alaska and abandoned his stolen car at the airport. Upon his arrival, he found a job at a fishing boat, but within less than 2 weeks of starting, he was fired. So that evening, he went to a local bar and struck up a conversation with a miner named Jeff Diffie who invited him back to his apartment. But when the two arrived, Fautenberry stabbed him 18 times and stole his belongings. And when he was captured, Fautenberry confessed to not only killing Jeff, but also 5 other victims as well. As a result of these crimes, Fautenberry was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Fautenberry requested wheat toast, 2 eggs, fried potatoes, bologna, bread, mayo, tomato slices and lettuce, 2 Three Musketeers bars, and 2 packages of Reese's. In my opinion, the variety and quantity were solid, but none of the dishes were that exciting. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Kenneth Lee Boyd. In the year 1975, Boyd began what would become an incredibly tumultuous 13-year marriage with his wife Julie Curry. Their relationship was marred with physical abuse, numerous separations, and stalking until things eventually reached a violent climax on March 4th of 1988. On this day, Boyd drove with his sons to the home of his father-in-law where Julie and his children were staying. Upon his arrival, Boyd entered the house and began shooting, and though his sons tried to stop him, he eventually killed Julie and her father. And after calling the police to turn himself in, Boyd was tried and sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Boyd requested a medium-well New York strip, a baked potato with sour cream, a roll with butter, a salad with ranch, and a Pepsi. In my opinion, this is a super classic spread, but it could have used some dessert. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Robert Alton Harris. In the year 1978, Harris asked his 16-year-old brother Daniel to help him rob a bank. However, the pair lacked a getaway vehicle and had to steal one on the way to the robbery. So on July 5th of 1978, the brothers approached a pair of teenagers eating hamburgers in their car and demanded they drive them out to a remote area. But once they did so, Harris executed them both and stole their car. But within less than an hour of carrying out the robbery, Harris and his brother were captured, and the arresting officer was the father of one of the young boys the brothers had killed. As a result of his crimes, Harris was sentenced to death by asphyxiation gas. For his final meal, Harris requested KFC, 2 Domino's pizzas, ice cream, a bag of jelly beans, a 6-pack of Pepsi, and a pack of Camel cigarettes. In my opinion, this meal was strong all around, but I wish the quantity would have been spread across a few more items. I'm placing this meal in A tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Marilyn Plantz. In the year 1988, Marilyn decided she wanted to kill her husband James to collect his $300,000 life insurance policy. So, she reached out to 2 of her friends to ask for their help. First, the pair planned to ambush him in his car on the way home from work, but they lost him in traffic and had to give up. So, a few weeks later, they decided to wait inside the Plantz household instead and attack James with a bat when he entered his home. And though they would succeed in this attempt, they failed to make it look like an accident like they intended. So to cover up their tracks, they forced James into a truck and burned him alive. As a result of this crime, Plantz was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For her final meal, Plantz requested a chicken taco salad, a Mexican pizza, 2 enchiritos, 2 chicken tacos, an order of cinnamon twists, pecan pie, and Coca-Cola. In my opinion, Taco Bell wouldn't be my first choice of fast food, let alone my final meal. I'm placing this meal in C tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of Gilbert Ray Postelle. In the year 2004, Gilbert's father Brad got into a serious motorcycle accident which left him with severe injuries to his body and brain. So, roughly a year after this crash, Gilbert and 3 accomplices decided they wanted to enact revenge. So on the night of May 30th, 2005, the group launched a so-called blitz attack on the home of those they thought responsible for the accident. During this ambush, the group stormed into the house, forced the 4 people inside to kneel in their yard, and proceeded to gun them down with an AK-47. As a result of these crimes, Gilbert was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For his final meal, Postelle requested 20 chicken nuggets, 3 large fries, a crispy chicken sandwich, a regular chicken sandwich, a large Coke, and a caramel frappe. In my opinion, this is a great spread to order from McDonald's, but it's not quite as great for your final meal ever. I'm placing this meal in B tier. Today, we are taking a look at the selection of the Malaysian pop star Mona Fandey. From a young age, Fandey often performed as a dancer and singer, and eventually went on to release an album of her own. However, her career in music failed to take off, so she decided to make a pivot and become a bomo, or shaman. In this new pursuit, Fandey would offer witchcraft services to wealthy clients and politicians. But one day, things took a turn when Mona, her husband, and assistant were approached by the politician Moslin Idris, who was seeking supernatural help to boost his career. Here, the trio couple lured Idris into Fandey's home under the guise that they were to perform a special ritual, but once he'd entered, the group proceeded to behead him with an axe, chop him up into 18 pieces, then skinned and buried his remains. As a result of these crimes, Fandey was sentenced to death by hanging. For her final meal, Fandey was given a dinner of Kentucky Fried Chicken. In my opinion, it's hard to go wrong with KFC, but there's nothing about it that really stands out. I'm placing this meal in C tier.